So this is a picture of Muhammad. This isn't my friend's real picture. It's a school that been able to help Muhammad's children go to. You can see it's fairly okay. I'm gonna get to the point in the story and talk about these kids later. Here's a typical street in Beirut. It's a shopping district, and as I tell this story about Muhammad, he does eventually come to be married, and maybe one of these women here represent his wife. Maybe these women, they like to meet up at night to just get a breather from the kids, or maybe they work in this district, to make a little extra money for the family, or maybe they're just out finding out local news, picking up some items that they need. As you can see, the woman in the foreground has a bag on her shoulder. Some kind of shopping bag. You'll see in the right, Western attire for men. You'll see some English in the store window, street lights, finished concrete. Or maybe Muhammad's wife is more Western. Maybe when they could afford it, they would like to go out and maybe get a glass of wine or have an alcoholic beverage, because not everybody from Syria is Muslim. Or maybe she's even like very Western. You can see in the left-hand corner a GNC. So we have these in our malls, but nutritional products for those who are into athletics and training. You can see this woman, she has maybe her joggers on and a tight-fitting, form-fitting type of dress, and so she's very Western. Or maybe this is Muhammad working at night in the halwa. Halwa, this is the sweets. It's a rolled up pastry with some kind of sugar, condensed sugar water, pecans, walnuts, often pistachios, taken with Turkish coffee. Often you can see how excited this man is in the blue jacket about getting some. Now, a lot of the Arab men, they dress exactly like this, just slacks, trousers, a jacket, so it can be a little bit cool in the winter. But yeah, so maybe this is our friend Muhammad. So all the time we're going to meet this guy, a Lebanese man who comes to our Syrian friends and say, you're Syrian, why don't you go out? Why don't you go back to your country? And we're going to explore this question a little bit. Why is it that Syrians are asked this constantly? And what does it mean at face value? And what does it mean kind of underlying as an underlying message? So let's find out what brought Syrians to Lebanon and why 1 in 7 people in Lebanon are from Syria. I mean, that's a lot. 1 in 7 equates to about 14%. So that is a lot of people. We all have our different thoughts on immigration where we live, and illegal immigration is especially a hot button topic. And what if 14% of your population of your city, was someone who's not from your country and maybe isn't paying taxes, doesn't belong there? You could start to think about, wow. Also, this is a very beautiful place. This is the setting sun to the west, Roche Rocks in Beirut, Mediterranean Sea. Beautiful place, no doubt. So in red is Syria, and just starting at the upper left, you can see the boot of Italy, Sicily, below that, Croatia, Serbia, so Romania, Greece, former Yugoslavia, Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan. So Syria is right in the middle. To the east, Iraq, Iran. To the south, Saudi, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, Libya, all of this. So it gives you a good idea. And then even to the east of Iran, Iraq, to the east of Iran, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, all the stans, Pakistan. So interesting part of the world. So, and then this is just looking at the neighbors of Syria. So to the north, Turkey in green, Iraq in purple. I put this little dotted segment there in the northern part of Iraq to kind of highlight Kurdistan. So this is kind of an unofficial region governed by the Kurds inside of Iraq. And then, so in the orange, Jordan, and then in the green right there is Lebanon. And of course, don't forget the little island of Cyprus out there in the middle of the Mediterranean. So that gives you an idea of what your options are. If you're a refugee looking to leave Syria, you basically have those 4 options: Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, or Lebanon. So let's walk through about 100 years of history in about 15 minutes of what's going on in this region. So the gold I've added, and the gold would be the furthest extent that the Ottoman Empire pushed during their reign. They had all the great, ports, the great waterways, the coastal access. I mean, North Africa, Persian Gulf, Gulf of Oman. I mean, they really had a lot of great access as far as trading and shipping and all that stuff. Syria's right in the middle of it. Okay, so in 1918, end of World War I, October, Arab troops led by Emir Faisal, supported by British forces, they captured Damascus. And so this ends 400 years of Ottoman rule. And this is just another representation of the same thing I tried to show in the previous slide of the areas that they controlled. So pretty extensive, and 400 years of Ottoman rule. I'm going to roll quickly through this. So I'm not going to talk about everything, but I am going to really focus in on things that are underlined in the pink, basically Emir Faisal. He wants Arab self-rule, and we remember that we just are coming off the defeat of Germany and the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. So he wants Arab rule, Arab self-rule. Okay, he's not going to get it though. We'll see in 1920 there's French control Lebanon and Syria, and then the British control Palestine. And below is a picture of Aleppo, biggest cities in Syria. So yeah, so the French and the British are controlling these lands in 1920, 2 years after the end of World War I. A little bit further on, Alawites, so we're talking about people groups. The Alawites are put on the coast. The Druze is like a kind of strange offshoot of Islam, very they're very separate. They keep themselves separate from other peoples as far as intermarrying and stuff, but they're in the south of Syria. And then Lebanon is separated off entirely. So from early on, this about 100 years ago, we see people kind of being segregated, and that may result in some of the present situations, relationships we have. Okay, 28, so 8 years later, elections for a constituent assembly. They draft a constitution for Syria, but the French reject it. So the Arab self-rule is still not happening after 10 years. 8 more years after that, France agrees to work towards Syrian independence and dissolves the autonomous regions, but they stick around. It says they maintain military and economic dominance and keep Lebanon as a separate state. So now the French are still around. 41, British and French troops occupy Syria. They're occupy Syria, and they're making promises about ending the French mandate. Well, this is 23 years after the end of World War I at this point, right? They're hanging around. So what happens? Well, the Ba'ath Party. You may have heard of this before. If you go to the first paragraph, it says the Ba'ath Party was founded in 1943 in Damascus, Syria. It was led by a couple people. And basically, if you go down further here, it means resistance. You can see that in parentheses. And basically, the Ba'ath Party espoused non-alignment and opposition to imperialism and colonialism. Yeah, no kidding. I mean, that totally makes sense, doesn't it? Because you've had all these like outsiders in your country, staying in your country, making decisions, saying whether or not you can have your own constitution, having their forces in your country. So it's an important thing, and something we'll hear about, as we continue to live our lives now, as the Ba'ath Party still comes up, even like Desert Storm, those wars, Iraq, Saddam Hussein, those may be like some kind of terms that go together in your mind. So the Ba'ath Party means resistance. Okay, so 1958, I mean, now we're, 50s America, things are going pretty well. So the Ba'ath Party, one thing I didn't mention, I should have said this before. Top paragraph. Pan-Arabist political party advocating for the formation of a single Arab socialist nation. So all the Arab countries coming in to become one huge country, right? One big, huge Arab country that's socialist, okay? So, not founded on democratic ideals, but socialist in nature. So huge one, right? One huge nation. Well, so then that makes sense. By 58, they say, let's work with the Egyptians. They try to do some partnership. They put the president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, basically into power. And so this is a weird thing. It lasts from 1958 to 1961, basically. Discontent with Egyptian dominance prompts a group of Syrian army officers to seize power in Damascus and dissolve the union. So that doesn't really work out. 63, a couple years after that, Ba'athist army officers seize power. By 67, so you have, this is a big historical moment. 67, the Israeli forces seize the Golan Heights from Syria, destroy much of Syrian's air force, and the Six-Day Wars with Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. So Six-Day War is a big deal. This is about the time that America is definitely, I think we're in Vietnam at this point, just as an idea, the 60s, all that movement. Okay, 73, America's still in Vietnam. Egypt and Syria go to war with Israel, but they cannot retake the Golan Heights. 76, June, Syrian army intervenes with the Lebanese civil war. I just point that out to say that now the Syrian troops are back in Lebanon, and Syrian troops are going to be in Lebanon a lot in the coming decades from 76 onward. So that's going to be a big thing to remember. Here's a map of Syria and Lebanon. So Lebanon is in green, and then in the pink is Syria. You'll see, I guess on the left, two major ports, Tartus in the south, Latakia in the north, and currently in Tartus, the southern port, the Russians have a 50-year lease on that port. They have military installations, and so it's one thing just to remember is that Syria has some pretty big investments from the Russians. That'll play in once we get into the civil war in like the last 10 years, from say like 2010 to 2020. Anyway, Aleppo in the north, biggest city, we talked about that. Moving south down this region, you have Hama, home city, Damascus here, the capital. To the east of this, you have Iraq. Okay, fair enough. Also, this one here, Al Raqqa, you'll remember this. This was the self-proclaimed capital of ISIS. So it may have been a minute since you've heard about ISIS, but so that's an important one here in this valley. Okay, so Muslim Brotherhood is another thing that's important. And the 1980s, 1979, 1980, this was a pretty volatile time in the world. So, for example, 1979, Russian forces invade Afghanistan. 1980, you have the start of the Iran-Iraq war, and Syria sides with Iran. Okay, so that's something to know about. You have the Muslim Brotherhood. It's a lot like how it sounds, but it's interesting. They're basically advocating a return to the Quran and the Hadith as like way to build a modern Islamic society. It takes root in Egypt, Sudan, Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, and North Africa. The basically rulers in Syria do not like this thing, and they end up killing a lot of Syrian people in order to shut it down and put it down. So in the 1980s, the Muslim Brotherhood experienced a renewal as part of the general upsurge of religious activity in Islamic countries. And then we see middle part, an uprising of the Brotherhood in the Syrian city of Hama in February 1982 was crushed by the government of Hafiz al-Assad at the cost of about 25,000 lives. So Hafiz al-Assad is the father of the current Syrian president Bashir al-Assad, and so basically this man, he had no problem shedding blood basically to put down ideological like revolutions that would kind of challenge his rule. Anyways, 82, just similar thing. You see a Muslim Brotherhood uprising in the city of Hama, suppressed by the army. Tens of thousands of civilians are killed. Now I'm going to start highlighting anytime we have like Israelis attacking parts of Lebanon or Syria. So 82, you have the first one. Israeli army attacks the PLO base in Beirut. So PLO, this is Palestinian Liberation Organization. So this is Yasser Arafat. Anyways, 83, Lebanon, Israel announced to end hostilities, but again, Syrian forces are still in Lebanon. So, still boots on the ground in Lebanon. 87, President Assad sends troops into Lebanon for a second time. So, again, more troops. And why I say that is 87, this is not that long ago. This is 33 years ago, 35 years ago. So, anyone under 35 would really remember the age when there was Syrian troops in Lebanon. And do you think they've forgotten that? No, they certainly have not. 2000, getting into more recent history, Hafez al-Assad dies, and he's succeeded by his second son, Bashir. Bashir means lion. Anyways, 2001, they outlaw the Muslim Brotherhood. 2001, also Syrian troops evacuate Beirut, but they redeploy in other parts of Lebanon. So they're out of Beirut, a major city in Lebanon, but they're still in all other parts of the country. And this is going on now. This is, 14 years, from 87 to 2001. So they've just been around and around and around, doing whatever they've been doing. 2001, detention of MPs and other pro-reform activists, crushing hopes of a break with the authoritarian past of Hafez al-Assad. So people don't want an authoritarian past to continue, but Bashir is basically going to keep things as authoritarian as ever, essentially. 2004, U.S. imposes economic sanctions, and that's going to be a big deal because we're going to do some calculations on the sanctions. There's 2005, a prime minister, beloved man in Lebanon by the name of Hariri. He is assassinated, and Washington cites that there may have been Syrian influence in his death. Okay, so also don't think that people have forgotten that. What else do we have? 2007, Israel carries out another airstrike on a nuclear facility in Syria. 2008, so now in America we're in like the financial crisis, housing crisis. Syria establishes diplomatic relations with Lebanon for the first time since both countries established independence in 1940. So they hadn't had diplomatic relationships for, 68 years? That's a long time to not have any diplomats, any embassies in each other's countries, no working together, none of that. Well, So that says a lot. 2011, what is it? Okay, so this is again talking about the Israeli air raid, destroying that nuclear program in Syria, 2011. What else? Now this is getting weird. 2011, the Arab League votes to suspend Syria, accusing it of failing to implement an Arab peace plan, and they impose sanctions. So Syria is going to go through some massive inflation because no one will buy their goods, no one will buy their exports. The Arabs, those in the Arab League, won't buy it, and we're soon going to see that many other governments, including the Americans, will also put sanctions on Syria. Okay. Government steps up the bombardment of homes and other cities. Again, bombing of their own people is something that happens quite frequently if you're Syrian on the wrong side of the Syrian government. 2012, I just want to highlight on this slide that we're going to start to see a lot of players come into the scene. So when you think of the Syrian civil war, you can't just think of like Group A versus Group B. No, there's like Group A versus B versus C, D, E, F, G, H, I. There's all kinds of international players and local groups that come into this. So the first one we see, Free Syrian Army, that's one. We go down to the next pink one, National Coalition for Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces, coming out of Qatar. Then you have the US, the British, French, Turkish, Gulf states recognize this basically national coalition as the legitimate representative of Syrian people. Okay, all these outsiders say that Bashir's government is not the true government. We're recognizing this other group, right? That's a lot of outside forces. These are very powerful. These are very rich countries, big militaries in these countries. That's a lot of players just right there. Now, you guys know that eventually we get to the situation of all these refugees coming to live in these tent cities. You'll notice it looks like this girl is walking on some kind of improved, maybe, it's not dirt, it's not packed dirt. It looks like asphalt, like street. You can see in the foreground there is a like dish network type of satellite dish. These people are here to stay. And this was how Jordan dealt with refugees coming into their country a lot more than Lebanon. So Jordan had a high kind of approach of setting up camps. Anyways, I want you to grab your phone really quick. We're going to do some calculations. I'm going to walk you through inflation, how to think about it, and a little bit about what happened in Syria over a 10-year stretch. So grab your phone, open up the calculator. We're going to start at the top left. The top half, or the left half, I should say, the left half of this is an example to understand just the basic concept in mathematics of inflation. The right half is going to be the actual numbers coming out of Syria from 2010 to 2020, so this 11-year stretch. But let's just first start with what do we mean by inflation, how does it work, and how is it calculated? Here and here, I'm going to just use the Lebanese. I could use any lira, any currency. I could use yen, I could use Kuwaiti dollars, anything, but I'll just use LL as the foreign currency, and then USD here for the one. We'll keep the US stable, so we'll just say that the US dollar is stable and the inflation is happening here in this local currency. So in the beginning you have a 1-to-1 exchange rate. I made these numbers up, so that's easy to work with. If you have 100% inflation, now I need twice as much. I need 100% more of the liras that I had to get the same dollar, to buy the same dollar. And so that's what we mean when we say 100% inflation. We'll see that right here in this column here. So it's going to be 100% every level, but every time that this number doubles, you have another 100% inflation from what you had in the prior period. So 1 to 2, that's 100% inflation. 2 to 4, I need 100% more of these liras that I had previously to buy the same dollar. 4 to 8, again, it's another doubling. 8 to 16, again, I need 100% more than what I had. 16 to 32, I needed 100% more than what I had. If you add these numbers up, 100% at 5 different periods, that's, you know, we're doubling it every period. And you can add those up. Basically, you can keep track of it cumulative over time. So through one period, it's 100%, through 2 periods, 200, 3 periods, 300, 400, and then 500% over the 5 periods. And we saw that the basic change was from 1 to 32 as far as the number of lira that I needed just to buy a dollar. Okay, so I picked those numbers. You don't have to double it like this. You could double it. 1 to 2 is arbitrary. I just picked these numbers. But you could do the same thing, only go from 50 to 100. That would be a doubling. 100 to 200, that would be another doubling. 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16. And you'd still have the same structure, and you'd still have the same 500% cumulative inflation. Now, why I use these numbers is because these match fairly closely to what we see over the 11-year period in Syria. So, for example, if I start here in my example with 50 Lebanese lira to the dollar, here we had 47 Syrian pounds to 1 US dollar. So 47 to 1 is fairly close to 50 to 1. You know what I mean? And then if we jump down here to the bottom, here it ends up going to 1700 to 1, which is fairly similar to 1600 to 1. 1600 to 1 would be 500% if we start at 50. In this situation, it would be 517% over more periods. So it took longer for this to happen in real life in Syria, but it did basically happen. What I'd like you to do is, what you can do is take the original number, 1, and divide it by 32. And it'll basically tell you, like, as a percentage, how much money, how much value you had left from the nest egg that you had. And you should get 0.03125. This would mean that you have about 3% of your original asset left as far as value, as far as real purchasing power. So if you just stuck that under your bed, and you would have lost 97% of your value of the currency. So yeah, we see this. We start at 47 to 1, then it goes 59 to 1, then drops, goes back up again, 70 to 1. Then 2013 is really bad. 300 to 1, 240 to 1, back up again, 380 to buy $1 US. And then it gets really bad. 2000, it gets bad. 700 Syrian pounds to buy $1 US. It drops down for a couple years, but 2019 and 2020 are especially bad, jumping up 950 to 1, and then 1700 to 1. So this is like a huge amount of inflation. I mean, it was really, and it was because of the sanctions. What else were they going to do? They had to print money. No one would buy their goods. Everybody was, boycotting what they were having to sell. And over a 10-year period, you had 517% inflation, which is one of the big reasons why so many people left Syria when they did. We're going to go back to this highlight. Syrian authorities refused to discuss a transactional government. The Syrian army and Hezbollah forces. So Hezbollah, that's another player, right? Then you have, anytime you see Islamic State of Iraq, this is ISIS that we've heard about before. Yeah, we've definitely heard about this many times. And then you have the U.S. and 5 Arab countries launching airstrikes against ISIS. Okay, so this is a lot of people flying bombing raids, airstrikes in your country. This is just another picture of an important city. This was another picture. You have Latakia, the big port, right? You have Aleppo, the major city. You have this area kind of controlled by ISIS and other groups. Well, this is an important passageway to get goods back and forth. And it shows you how close in proximity these forces kind of come to be to some of these important municipalities. Let's go back and talk about Muhammad. So at this point, his kids don't exist. He hasn't had children yet. He's still living in Lebanon. He knows his wife, but he hasn't married her yet. Okay? They just know each other. So between 2015 and 2017, this is when we saw this massive inflation start to occur, all these bombing raids, things really go off the rails. And you see the biggest red dot, 6.6 million Syrians are internationally displaced persons. A lot go to Turkey, 1.5 million go to Lebanon, and of course they go to other places. So a lot of people decide this is enough, we have to get out. We have to get out. So remember this guy, you're Syrian, why don't you go out? Why don't you go back to your country? Well, in the original time we met this guy, it seemed kind of like a harmless, legitimate question. But now we know what we know, and you realize that it's a little bit of a dig. It's a little bit of an insult. I mean, where are these people supposed to go? There's war, there's bombing raids, there's all these militarized groups. The inflation is totally gone. The economy is totally messed up. Like, why would I go back there, But yet, why do I have to answer this guy's question every day from all these Syrian people? Why are you here in Lebanon? Why don't you go out? It's like, I can't. Obviously, I can't go back. I can't go back there. Now, in Lebanon, I said 1 in 7 before, but in some places it's as many as 1 in 4 people are now, a Syrian refugee. 1 in 4. Every 4th person you meet is from Syria. And what that means is there's a lot more people living in the country. It's just Russia continues to do airstrikes. There's the Syrian army. It's just a lot of fighting, basically. That's what we're going to say. But this is an important thing. I mentioned this before. This red dot says 1.5 million come to Lebanon. Well, there was only 6 million people in Lebanon before. So if you add 1.5 over the new total of 7.5, it's something like 1 in 5 persons now in the entire country of Lebanon are an outsider. That's 20% of your people, right? 20% of the population is from somewhere else, there illegally. Well, here's an article. It says that the UNHRC, that's the High Commission for Refugees, basically they're trying to do their job, and they're not allowed to register these refugees officially in the UN. Lebanese government basically blocks that from happening. Now, there's two important words I want you to pick up on. One is sponsor, and the other is soldier. Let's start with soldier, and we'll go back to sponsor. Soldier, we can knock that out right away. If you're a man of fighting age and you go back to Syria, if you're Syrian, it's only $8,000 to buy your way out of fighting in Assad's government, in his army. Well, a lot of people don't want to get shot at. They don't want to die. They don't want to, orphan their kids, so to speak, or widow their wives. They're not interested. And also they can't come up with $8,000. So that's one reason they can't go back. The other thing is sponsor. What basically Lebanon says is we can't handle this, all of these people. So we're going to not give them any rights. If they want to hold a job, they're going to need a Lebanese person to sponsor them. We're not going to allow them to have a bank account. We're not going to allow them to own a car or a motorcycle. We are not going to allow them to own a business or open a business or own any property of any kind. If they need to do anything, we're going to always make sure that they're kind of shackled to some sponsor. And that is going to be basically like Lebanon's approach to keep the UN from interfering and basically to try to get these people out of Lebanon as soon as possible. One interesting thing from the Lebanese perspective is I want to draw your attention to this bottom right portion. It basically says funding requested by the UNHRC. You can see they requested $4.3 billion and they only received $1 billion, maybe a little bit more at this time. It says $1 billion received. So if that is true, and if that is the fact, and you're Lebanon, and you have all these new people, all these new people living in your country, do you see that the international community is going to help you pay for these people, to take care of them, to feed them, clothe them, house them, provide medical care and education for them? Obviously, the numbers tell the story. The international community is not coming to help, meaning that Lebanon is left to pick up the bill. A bill that they didn't ask for, that they didn't ask for this, So again, now you see why this guy maybe is saying this every day. You're Syrian, why don't you go out? Why don't you go back to your country? He's basically saying, we can't handle this. We don't have the infrastructure. We just can't really deal with this. From an economical point of view, when you have all these new people come into the city, it puts stress on your electrical grid, your streets, you have congestion, it raises the price of everyone's goods, most especially housing, and also it undercuts the local labor wages. You basically have scab labor coming in, and so people, Lebanese people, are making less and having to pay more for everything. They're not happy about it, obviously. Anyways, there's a lot of groups, anyway, like Donald Trump and the Americans are now running missile attacks. You have Kurdish troops coming out of Iraq or Turkey. You have something called the Syrian Democratic Forces. We've talked about the Islamic State. And then you even have Hezbollah again fighting here. So 2017 is when our friends, Mohammed and his wife, actually decide to get married. And so he heads up to Lebanon, to Syria, to get permission and ask, get some paperwork done, get a marriage certificate, get it all done legal and proper, and ask the parents. Something happens where actually the whole marriage is brought into question. His dreams of having children come into serious question. Going back to the sponsor thing, he goes up to the border and there's someone with his name. Of course, there's a lot of people named Muhammad. So someone with Muhammad's name is being wanted for human trafficking, maybe shuttling people either into Lebanon or out of Lebanon into Syria, whichever way it is. And this is when the sponsor comes so important. This is a picture of a bunch of Syrian guys that got captured trying to get into Europe through Libya. And they were captured and detained. So this is what happened to Muhammad. He gets thrown into prison because he has the same name as someone else, and he has no recourse. He has no legal representation. He has no money. He is not a citizen of Lebanon. He is an illegal refugee, and thank goodness he had worked all those 14, 16-hour days for his sponsor at this halwa shop, where his sponsor comes in and gets him out of prison after 5 days. But he meets guys that have been in for months, with no hope of ever getting out. There's no process. There's really no process. So after this, he's very shaken. He's very scared about, can Lebanon ever be my home? And the answer is no, it certainly cannot. Islamic group is driven from Raqqa, so they're on the decline. Kurdish forces, Yeah, U.S. withdraws troops from northern Syria. The Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi dies, and so basically by 2020, the end of ISIS kind of comes to pass. And so let's look at Lebanon's finances because that's like the war and everything, but it's really interesting if you look at Lebanon and what they did with their banking. So one thing to know is that Lebanon has, like many countries that have smaller economies, a currency that's pegged to like a larger, something like a dollar or the euro. This is not uncommon. So their official peg was $1 will get you 1,500 Lebanese lira. And that's great. I mean, it gives people confidence in the lira if they know they can always exchange it for dollars, because dollars are used across the world for like 60 to 70% of international purchases and transactions. So if you can ever switch into dollars easily, then you're fine, right? The problem is if you're the Lebanese government, you may have a tendency to get in a pinch. And if you're in a pinch, you may want to print up a little bit extra Lebanese lira. And that puts you into a scenario where you have the official rate and then what's reality. In reality, once you start printing, there's not enough dollars in reserves to match the lira. It's imbalanced at that point. So that was one problem. They started printing a little bit and maybe got caught a little bit. The other thing was that the Lebanese banks, and when I was there, I was like, how do I get one of these banking accounts, one of these savings accounts? You could get like 8, 9, 10, some reports even said 12 to 15% just for opening a bank account. Now the problem with this is this didn't make any sense. The banks could not turn around and make 17% or better on that money. So if they couldn't do that, then it was basically a losing proposition for them. They always needed to get new investors. That was the scheme. It was kind of a little bit of a pyramid scheme. You know, we'll pay off these high interest rates that we promised to these people by just bringing in more people, right? We'll just take the money from the new people that said, oh, I want to get 13% on my money. Great. No risk, 13%. Great. Let's do it. Take their money, use those deposits to pay out the interest expenses on the old people, and just keep the game running until the bottom falls out, which of course it was going to do eventually. But they knew that they had problems. And so they were trying to basically get their hands on some money whichever way they could. It was basically defrauding new investors, new bank holders. Here's another weird thing. Lebanese government, they don't have a full government from 2012 to 2018. They do have elections, peaceful elections in 2018. Hariri is elected as prime minister, but people demand that he quits. He steps down, his government steps down a year later, by 2019. They do put in some kind of interim government, whatever that is. But, without everyone being in position, without, all the seats filled, without all the ministries having proper, people running oversight, you have things mismanaged. And in August of 2020, you have the huge port explosion that we'll look at in a second. Now, the educated and the connected people and the elites, they see what's going on early. They move all their money out into whatever, Europe, Switzerland. They get out. But the common people, they do not know what is about to come. Inflation starts to rise at the end of 2019. Lebanon basically can't use their dollars to buy imports, and they have a huge trade deficit. You can see here they import about $20 billion worth of imports. They export about $1 billion, right? A 20-to-1 ratio. I mean, this is really bad. They can't make anything that they need. They have to buy it from everyone else. And what happens is the other countries see that their lira is not very dependable. They don't want liras. They'll import goods into Lebanon, but they want to be paid in dollars. This quickly diminishes the dollar reserves, meaning that the liras are backed by nothing anymore. It's just a fake money. Here's a picture of the explosion. You can see in the foreground some multi-story buildings that are just dwarfed in size, a crane as well. It's a huge explosion, huge traumatizing explosion, and this at the time when there was no government. Basically, Lebanon goes on to default on their euro bonds. This is a bond dominated in something other than liras, because no one wants their liras. Inflation increases. To buy $1 now, you need 6,000 lira. Then you need 8,000 lira. Then you need 10,000 lira. After the explosion in the port, the exchange rate jumps. Now I need 17,000 lira just to buy $1. Mohammed just sent me something today or this week. He said it now is like 28,000. It's real bad. It's not good. 2021, the IMF offers loans, but Lebanon refuses to grant central bank audit. So in order to get those loans from the IMF, you need two things. You need a full standing government, and you need to grant access so that someone can do a proper bank audit. And basically, the books are cooked. Nobody wants the auditors to come in, find out where we're leaking money and who took it, essentially. Yeah, the exchange rate goes to 25,000 for $1. Syrians are making $50 a month because they're still making their old salary. They're still getting paid what they were before the inflation. So in dollar terms, it's $50 a month. So for a family of four, our friends are literally living on less than $1 a day. Banks basically lock up dollar accounts. They limit withdrawals. You can't get your money out. Yeah, it's like Venezuela basically. So that's kind of what happened. So what are you going to do? If you're these people, you can't get money from the IMF. You've defaulted on your loans. You don't have any dollars left to back up your currency. You could print more lira, but I mean, what's the point? Nobody wants it. So one analyst says basically the government scalps 250 million US dollars aid money that was supposed to go to Syrians. But our friend Mohammed claims that it's actually more like $3 to $4 billion, and the way that they do that is basically, if say they receive like $1 billion, okay, so, and that was supposed to go to Syrians. So if it was $1 billion here, it'd be one with a B after it, which means it would be 25,000 with a B after it here, right? In liras, only in liras. So they're supposed to give out 25,000 billion liras to Syrians, right? Because that would be the street rate. That would be the rate that, you know, if a Syrian wanted to buy a can of Coke, it would be 25,000. If they wanted to buy like a snack cake or a juice, it would be like 25,000. The scheme that the Lebanese government does is said, okay, instead of giving them the 25,000, they say, oh, we gave the money to the Syrians, but we gave it to them at the official rate. Do you guys remember what the official rate was? The official rate was, oh, that means I gave them 1,500 liras. This is almost nothing, right? I can't buy a can of Coke with this. I can't buy a piece of gum with this, maybe. I can't do anything with this. So basically that 1,500 out of this that was supposed to go to Syrians, 1,500 went to Syrians. The rest the government kept. And their basically justification was, well, you know, this is the Syrians' fault anyway in the first place. Like, they destroyed our entire country and our economy, which isn't true. It's definitely not true, as you've seen. But at the same time, what else is Lebanon going to do? The international community isn't going to really give them money. So that's kind of where we are. You can listen to this clip, but I'll just basically tell you that's what Muhammad says in that clip. So thanks so much for checking out the whole slideshow. Everyone, thanks for enjoying the video. I thought it was super great for me to learn it as I went through the information. So I hope you had the same experience. Just want to draw your quick attention to, I'm trying to work in Lebanon. I'm actually trying to go back to Lebanon. I don't want to take Lebanese jobs. I don't want to take jobs from Syrians. It's not a really good environment, as you saw, in order for people to really invest for like a business. There's a lot of corruption still. There's problems with rule of law, transparency, accountability, audits, hyperinflation. It's not a time when you want to ask a bunch of investors to like pour money into, say, like a new soap company or a new restaurant or a new anything. There's also a lot of problems with people controlling the exports. And so there's, I mean, my friend basically says there's like a lot of like small mafias that control each industry, and it's not capitalism. So you can't just go in there and use maybe the training that you have or like that I have in entrepreneurship, write a business plan, ask investors to jump on board, talk about a return on investment, operationalize it, and start going. Why? Because there's too many significant hurdles. If you can't export your goods, you can just stop right there, right? So anyways, what I'm trying to do is use this YouTube channel and other means just to bring in any money, any which way, right? And so, sure, ask for it through Patreon if you guys want to donate. But that's the idea, right? Move back, support the restaurants, support my friends, you know, emotionally, rent, you know, be involved, try to figure out a way to bring in fresh money into the country. So maybe YouTube isn't a great way to do it. Maybe donations is a better way to do it. But like I said, I don't want to take those people's jobs, so I'm trying to come up with like a fresh stream to kind of be part of the solution. And it's a slow go. It's a real slow go. But I've really enjoyed the channel. So anyways, thanks so much. We'll talk to you later.